Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Eudora Welty Writers Symposium. As always, we'd like to thank the Robert M. Herron Foundation for their support and to thank everyone at Mississippi University for Women, including the Department of Languages, Literature, and Philosophy and the Low Residency MFA in Creative Writing, who have helped to make this event possible. I'm Kendall Dunkelberg. I direct the Low Residency Program and chair of Languages, Literature, and Philosophy. I also want to remind everyone that the Welty Gala, where normally we'd be enjoying great food and great company on this Friday night, it's been going all day. The W Foundation has had their no-show gala fundraiser, and the funds raised will go on to scholarships as they usually do. So if you normally donate, or if you feel so moved and want to give a little to MEW scholarships, go to www.mew.edu/welty/gala, G-A-L-A. And you can still make a donation at least until 8 p.m. when the event officially ends. I would not be surprised if you could do it at 9:05 when we're done, right after we're done, if you want as well. We certainly miss the opportunities that we normally have to talk in the hallway, have coffee, buy books, etc., meet everyone in person. But once again, we're so glad to be able to be with you by Zoom and also on Facebook through Facebook live streaming. After each reader this evening, we'll have questions and answers. If you're in Zoom, feel free to unmute your mics and ask your questions. And if you're on Facebook, please write your questions in the comments and we'll try to watch those and ask your questions for you. Our first reader this evening will be M.O. Walsh, who is the author of 2 novels, his debut, the New York Times best-selling My Sunshine Away, and most recently, the Big Door Prize, which Publishers Weekly gave a starred review, praising it for offering many insights on the mysteries of the human heart. Both of his novels are set in Walsh's native Louisiana, where he grew up in and around Baton Rouge, and both involve some pretty dark material, with the death of a teenager looming over the action. The Big Door Prize is also filled with hope as the residents of Deerfield, Louisiana begin to discover their true life's potential and live their dreams. I'll leave it to Neil to reveal exactly how that happens, but let's just say they have a little help in discovering or rediscovering these dreams from the Dynamix machine that appears at the local grocery store. When one character, who is a jazz musician teaching one of the main characters trombone, learns that his potential in life is to be a magician, he gets out the old magic kits he had as a kid and has always brought with him through all his travels. It appears that he's quite talented as a magician, yet he also realizes that his true magic is in his music. Like this character, Walsh weaves a web of magic, in his case, with language and story. Music is also ever present in this novel, both in the characters' lives and in the inspiration Walsh draws from the songs of the amazing John Prine. The warmth and humanity of a Prine lyric informs this novel, and many of the characters could easily have stepped right out of his songs. For the Prine fan, there are many allusions to his songs throughout the novel, including, of course, the novel's title and many chapter titles. M.O. Walsh was born in Baton Rouge. He earned his MFA in fiction from the University of Mississippi and is currently director of the Creative Writing Workshop at the University of New Orleans. Besides his novels, he has published short fiction and essays in the New York Times, Oxford American, the Southern Review, American Short Fiction, Epoch, and many others. With his second novel, he is quickly establishing himself as a major voice in Southern writing. His work is thoughtful, joyful, and necessary. Please welcome M.O. Walsh.
Well, thank you. I've been waiting for a long time for someone to say that. So if I could take that and use it as a blurb, Kindle, establishing, the voice, all that stuff, that would be great.
I'll send
So
it.
yeah, I don't know if you can do our Zoom video conferences like legal documents at this point. Can I take it and send it to my publisher? That was really nice. That's one thing that's been great about this conference so far is, man, just the obvious care that y'all take, with these introductions, with the way you're presenting these writers. I was able to go to the one this morning, and just it's so nice just to feel that sort of mutual, respect. It's really great. Thank you very much for doing that. So hi everybody. I met some people I recognize that I met them at a class visit earlier. So hello again. I've got friends here. Katie Simpson-Smith's one of my good friends. She's here. Julianne James, I know, here. We're lucky that she's been teaching for us a little bit at UNO, and so is Katie. So really lucky to see everybody. I wish that I was there. I can tell you I know exactly where I was when I got the invite for this conference. I was very luckily at the beach. I got an email asking me to do this, and I just think, first of all, the name Eudora Welty, that's a lot of credibility there. It sounded pretty good. Symposium, I think, sounds pretty fancy. I like that. There's two things put together. And then it was an email asking, inviting me, which felt like quite an honor. So I really do appreciate it. And I was excited because I'd never been to Columbus either. So excited to go there, and also excited because, I'd been basically by myself writing a novel for 4 years. I was really looking forward to seeing other humans and talking about it and shaking hands. I miss shaking hands and hugging. Honestly, I know that sounds weird, but I miss hugging strangers, just people on the street. It's kind of how I am. But anyway, thanks for the introduction. It's good to see everybody. So I have a new novel that came out earlier last month, called The Big Door Prize. It's my third book. I had a collection come out that no one knows about, but that's okay. It came out with a real small press, and just sort of died. But it's okay. I still remember it. But I've got that book, and then this is my second novel after that. And I'll read a little bit from it because I know that's what y'all want me to do. But I'm also just happy to talk. Anything writing related or about the novel. I feel like I told the class that you're just going to hear me say all the same stuff again because they asked me a bunch of questions. So we could just go off topic too. I'm good with whatever y'all want to do. I'm sitting in my garage right now, which flooded earlier today, so my feet are wet. I'm not wearing shoes, and my feet are wet. But my kids are inside. On their iPads. I'm doing that sort of terrible parenting thing where I've got like some, I got to make sure they're occupied. So y'all pray for me. I don't know what they're doing in there. But I'm going to read to y'all with wet feet. Okay. So the way the book starts is, I guess it's, you call it a prologue or whatever. Mine, it just starts with question, right? So that's the first thing you see. I'm just going to read this, and then I'm going to read a little part later. Hopefully that's, funny or something. Okay, so this is the beginning, the Big Door Prize, okay? Question. How can you know that your whole life will change on a day the sun rises at the agreed upon time by science or God or what have you, and the morning birds go about their usual bouncing for worms? How can you know? And why would you think there's another life for you? Perhaps another possibility inside of you already, when the walk that you take each dawn is so lovely and safe, when the roads are all paved and the sidewalks just swept, and those who move along them like you seem so content to retread the worn path that they've made. Why would you think it? After all, this is only Deerfield, a town so simple it is named for what you might see and where you might see it. It is a place where storefronts hang flowering baskets, where the rocking chairs gently set on friendly porches look fit for rocking gently the friendly people who own them, as they rock gently their friendly parents before them. And such quiet on a morning like this one, Such quiet on every stormless morning in Deerfield that the only sound above you is the rustle of venturing squirrels in the branches. Maybe to your side, the huff of a familiar dog at a familiar fence line who muzzles your hand as you pass. And if this were not enough to comfort you, not enough to seduce you into believing that today is just another in the easy procession of days you began so long ago, the first words you hear spoken on this morning are the first words you hear spoken on most mornings. From the manager at the grocery store you walk to for coffee, who says, "Good day," and to whom you reply, "Isn't it though?" So how could you know? Perhaps you might know on this particular morning in Deerfield, in this small part of South Louisiana, because you see something new at the store. It is a simple looking machine sitting next to the customer service desk. It is large enough to enter through curtains, as one would a photo booth at the mall or parish fair, and promises to tell you your potential in life, what your body and mind are capable of doing, based on the science of DNA. Some people in town have already tried this machine, you've heard, and to surprising result. A neighbor opened up a new business after getting her readout. An old friend quit pills and got clean. Another person you know left town entirely, off on some long dreamt up vacation they never would have booked before. This kind of talk is enough to make you curious, to make anyone curious, the way word of a simple and miraculous new diet might do. And it cost only $2 to try. Today, tucked safely into your pocket, you have exactly $2. And you, tucked safely into your life, haven't much else to do. So you draw back the curtains and enter the booth. You give it your money. The screen brightens. You read a message that instructs you to take one of the Q-tips provided, to remove the plastic and gently swab the inside of your cheek, and so you do this as well, and why not? No one can see you. What would anyone care? You then deposit this into the slot as directed, and can't help but grin at the disclaimer that reads there is a 1% margin of error in a pursuit like this, and that the company, Dynamics, is not liable for any stress your new potential may cause. Yet still, you carry on. You wait for the result. But why? That is the question. Perhaps it is because people like you, people like us, when we are joking, say, well, what's the worst that could happen? But when we are honest, when we are alone, we wonder, what is the best? So that's the sort of opening little prologue thing or whatever, right? And so you get the idea that it's a small town in Louisiana. One day this sort of machine shows up at the grocery store that promises to tell people like sort of what their potential in life is based on analyzing their DNA, right? So it's a strange sort of premise, I recognize, right? But it's the type of thing where enough people start doing it. And I know a lot of people have read it because for class, but enough people start doing it in town that people start getting interested and like, all right, well, what, it's a gossipy sort of place too, like what my neighbor, like what was her readout? What's she doing? Who does she think she can be? Type of thing. And some people start following these, these what they call readouts and having success with them. Other people, just start trying out these new personalities based on what this machine is sort of telling them. And so we start the book that way, and then meet our main characters, Douglas and Sherilyn. It's a married couple, been together, married for about 15 years, very happily. And they love one another, right? But they're at that stage in life, he's just hitting 40. He's realizing that the job he's got is going to be the job he's got. There's probably not, no more promotions or anything coming. They're realizing these things and, feeling a little bit stagnant. And so that's sort of our main couple. Well, Sherilyn, his wife, tries this machine and gets this readout that sends her in this really sort of far out direction in terms of her dreams of what maybe she was meant to be, something that she never once imagined, right? Then he gets one that sort of does the opposite, right? So the whole novel sort of works with this tension of this married couple that hopefully you're rooting for. You want them to stay together, being sort of pulled in opposite directions by the vision of the future that they've gotten for themselves. So I'll read another little section. There's probably four main characters. There's the couple. There's a kid named Jacob Rishu, who's a high school kid, and then there's the priest at the local Catholic school where he goes to school and Douglas Hubbard works, named Father Pete. And I don't know. I think that we all try to like avoid cliches as much as we possibly can in writing. And I never once thought I would write a priest in my life. Like, how in the world can you do that? But this guy just popped up to me. Honestly, to tell the truth, I was at Mass one time, and they had a sort of guest speaker who was a priest from a different parish that came and talked. And I just thought his backstory was so cool. I just sort of hadn't heard it before, and I was interested in it. And it's sort of, next thing I know, I'm writing about this guy. And so once I knew I had a priest character, I felt like, there's got to be a lot of things that are terrible about being a Catholic priest. But one thing that's got to be kind of fun is the confessional booth. Just hearing what people are up to. I know there's serious stuff too, but I was trying to have some fun in this book. But anyway, just the idea of hearing what people are up to. And so I've got a chapter later on in the novel called You Forgive Us and We'll Forgive You. And this is a John Prine lyric from a song called Fish and Whistle, which we can talk about later if you want to talk about John Prine or musical influences on the book or anything like that. Like I said, whatever. But so the way this chapter works is it comes way later. And it's very different than the rest of them. Most of this book is, okay, so the prologue is second person, I guess, plural, right? But then we go into third person. It's pretty normal for a long time. But then every once in a while, we have these little chapters that sort of just speak as like the town almost. It's kind of like the collective sort of voice. Well, this one here, it's called You Forgive Us and We'll Forgive You. And it's just a bunch of different sections. Can you see that? Each of these different sections is a new person entering the confessional booth and speaking. Okay, so Father Pete doesn't talk at all. The priest doesn't talk at all on this one. So I figured I would just maybe read a couple of these people coming in and sort of unburdening themselves. And so keep in mind, if they say anything about a readout, that means that they've gone and done this machine, right? They've gone and done this dynamics machine. I'm watching Steve Yates's face to see, I want him to nod if he understands me. They've gone and done this dynamics machine, right? So if you hear something about readout, that's what that means. So what happens in the town is that everyone's sort of going a little crazy because they're all trying on these new personas, trying all this different stuff, okay? So I'm gonna read maybe 3 or 4 of these, and then I will stop torturing you. But in between them, I'll sort of put my hand up or something to let you know a new person is walking in, right? It's a new voice. Sound good? Thanks, Steve. I miss you, man. I haven't seen you in years. Okay, it's called You Forgive Us and We'll Forgive You. Look, I've read about bees, Father. And all those bees are dying because of cell phone towers or satellites or something like that. And it turns out that we need bees just to live because they pollinate everything. It's not just about the honey is what I'm saying, although that's important too. Anyway, we were doing our porch. The whole house needs an upgrade, really, but we're starting there. And so I knocked down this column on the porch, and there was this beehive in there, Father. You wouldn't believe it. It was as bigger than anything you've seen on TV, I imagine. And my wife, she's allergic to bees, you see. She was off at work, and I didn't want her to come home and see them because Lord knows what kind of fit she'd throw. We'd probably end up living at her sister's place. I know telling how long they've been there, too, without us even knowing. But it sort of floored me, Father. I mean, I just watched them crawling over one another. I just watched them forever. I thought about all that stuff I'd read. Thought about how sort of beautiful it all is. The whole shebang, how we're all connected together. About how something little like a bee ends up putting food on my plate and lets me and my family live. But not only that, how they depend on other little things like flowers to do it too. How there's this whole grand design to the deal where nothing's wasted. But I also thought about my wife, and how I told her I'd get this porch redone, how I could handle it. We didn't need to hire nobody to charge us 3 times what I could do it for. And so I guess what I'm telling you, Father, is that I gassed them. I killed them all. It's not sitting well with me. So many of them, Father, after the gas, they just kept falling. Forgive me, Father, but I don't really have much to confess. I mean, I'm only 15. I don't have a car. I'm at school most of the day, and I do my homework at night, and I don't get out much on the weekends, so I don't have that many opportunities to commit any really spectacular sins. Anyway, I got this readout the other day saying I'm supposed to be a priest too. I'm not all that psyched up about it, but my parents are. I just sort of figured, well, that's typical. Of course, that's what mine would say. I'll be a virgin forever. Anyway, they wanted me to ask you, is there some sort of school you go to for that? What's the pay like? Any health benefits? Forgive me, Father, but I got this readout just the other day. And do you know what it said? I'm sorry. I don't mean to cry, but do you know what it said? It said ballerina, Father. Ballerina. Just when I'd almost forgotten. I'm sorry. It's just that when I was a little girl and all through high school, you only knew how hard I worked, how hard I trained, the money my parents spent. I guess it just reminded me. I'm sorry. I'll stop. I promise. But I guess it just reminded me, of how I never wanted children. We were so young and stupid, and this has never been my life, really. I'm sorry, Father, but all these years, so many years, my own children, it made me remember I've never wanted them. Forgive me, Father, for I have committed the sin of lying. I have faked no less than 14 orgasms with my boyfriend since my last confession. But, that was a while ago, so I'm not sure if that's a lot or maybe like right in the middle. Last one. Now look, Father, this ain't easy to talk about, but I go to a lot of websites, you understand? Websites for adults. They got all sorts of stuff out there, I'm telling you. They got American ones, European ones, Mexican ones, a lot of stuff out of Prague, it seems. I mean, I feel like I've visited most of Prague at this point. And I'm married, so I steer clear of all that stuff that's trying to get you to meet up with local women and the like. I don't mess with all that local MILF type thing. I mean, I have boundaries. I just look at the ones of videos of people I'll never meet. It's all on the up and up is what I'm saying. I don't do anything wrong is what I'm saying. There's nothing illegal about it is what I'm saying. But what I'm trying to communicate here is that I go to these websites a lot. Hell, you can get them on your phone if you want to. Now, I don't really want to put a number on how many times I've gone to these various sites, but I'd be willing to bet that it is pretty surprising. I'll be at work sometimes, or I'll go into the kitchen when my wife's asleep. Anytime she leaves me alone at the house, really. And I think it's been a good thing in the big picture. I think it's helped me to stay faithful, to be able to sort of relieve myself when I need to. Because God knows my wife doesn't always want to stop her life every time I get a notion, and I understand that. I'm not mad about it. I probably wouldn't want to sleep with me either. So it's not about her at all, really. The problem, though, is that I'm 48 years old, and I've been doing this a while. And I think I've finally seen every single video out there that interests me. I just go from site to site now, just sort of aimless. There isn't anything I haven't already clicked on. I can't find anything I like that I haven't already seen is what I'm saying. It's all just the same body parts over and over doing the same up and down motions and makes me sort of scared, Father. Does that make sense? I guess it's got me thinking, well, now what? I'll stop there. Sorry. Yeah, that was, sorry, that was the reading. Sorry, I should probably go do something different. Sorry. But anyway, so yeah, back to serious writer face. It's the type of thing where this novel opened up just a whole lot of possibilities for different characters. I mean, you have a sort of story generating machine at the center of it, right? Where you have someone, think about this as a fiction writer. I know most people in here are. What do we do when we write a story, right? We have someone that already has something going on in their life, right? Whether it be what you pick your trajectory, flat line, rise, fall, it doesn't matter. They got that going on, and what does the story do? They come across something that's going to change the direction of that line, right? That's basically how all stories work. Well, that's what this thing does. I mean, every person that walks in gets some sort of vision of themselves, right? And so whether or not they want to accept it, deny it, pursue it, whatever, there it is, okay? So one of the things that was fun about writing this was there were just so many different ideas. but I also knew that if I chased every single one of them, the novel would be a huge mess. So I sort of stuck to a couple and then had chapters like this where hopefully gave you glimpses of how other people were maybe sort of, ping-ponging around with this idea, right? So the confessional booth, I mean, I'm sorry, I read like 4 of them. There's more, I'm sorry, but there's even more of those, and so trying to give a glimpse of how this could affect everybody in a really small town was the goal there. Do I do something now, Kendall? What do I do?
I think we can open it up for questions.
Yeah.
Facebook, no, there's a option to type their questions in, and anyone in our session can unmute themselves and ask a question.
Well, I'll say this. I read I was at the morning panel. Our AC broke, so I'm sorry I wasn't at the afternoon panel, but I had people literally like with shop vacs behind me trying to fix our air conditioning. But this morning, what we heard was like a lot of really dark, serious, wonderful stuff, right? I have S.A. Cosby's book sitting right here. I loved it. Big fan of Michael Ferris Smith's stuff too. All very dark and serious. And my first novel was kind of like that too. Not really sort of grit lit, but dark and sort of brooding. And I think for a long time, I thought that was the only way that fiction could sort of be written and taken seriously. But then I recognized that, all the books I was reading to go find pleasure were sort of like funny, and they sort of like looked at the world, in a way that wasn't totally dark. And so I got interested in that stuff. And so I feel the reason I say this because I feel funny now after like listening to all that really serious, dark stuff, reading something funny makes me feel like, I don't belong at the table or something. But I think the truth of the matter is, you as a writer, the books that you put out are such a small percentage of the stuff that you read, the stuff that you write that's never published, the stuff that you wrote for many, many years before you even got serious. It's such a small percentage of it that, the truth of the matter is I love funny stuff. I love, sweet stuff. I love stuff that celebrates love and all these things. So I just started thinking, well, man, if I like it so much when I go to read it, why do I feel like I can't write it? Why do I feel like there's some sort of barrier there? And so once I started this novel and I recognized it had room to be sort of funny and to sort of be playful in a way, I was just so thankful for it because it allowed me to be, I think, someone that's closer to who I like to be in real life. You know what I'm saying? I'm one of these people that somehow on October 23rd of 2020 somehow is still optimistic. It takes a lot of energy.
I have a question, Neil. As someone who teaches and influences other writers, could you talk a little bit about how that has either affected or helped or moved forward, or how has it affected your work?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to answer that. I'd love to hear that from you too, because you do this exact same thing, right? Well, I mean, I can tell you, okay, so I can tell you the personal side of it is this. And I think that unfortunately, I think a lot of my answers come from like a place of fear, like I'm afraid of different things, okay? One thing I'm really afraid of is being considered like a hypocrite, right? Or, phony or whatever, right? It's just sort of how I was raised. That was like the worst thing you could be is sort of hypocritical. And so whenever I teach and I'm teaching, I'm very lucky to teach graduate students like a lot of people in here are, but these people are serious. I mean, they love it and they're taking a huge risk to go and pursue this thing. I mean, this is not some sort of whim, anytime I'm going to sit on the opposite side of a table of that person and tell them and give them advice, right? And tell them, hey, you need to do this. You don't need to do that. You need to do this. Stop worrying about that. If I'm going to do that, then I need to make sure that I am writing absolutely to the best of my ability and working my butt off. Because I think a lot of times what happens as you know, you start teaching, man, teaching's hard. And it's, you know, one of my friends has a great quote about it. He says, teaching is like a gas, you know, in other words, it'll take up as much space as you let it. You know, and if you start, you know, if you get to that place where teaching is just taking up your entire life, it's really hard to write, right? But for me, if I'm not also going to work and thinking about my own stuff, thinking about what a clean sentence looks like, thinking about, you know, what plot does, if I'm not doing that for myself, I don't feel like I can talk to my students about it. And so to answer is a long way to answer your question. What it's really done for me is honestly motivate me to, you know, feel like I need to keep earning my job like every semester, right? I cannot go in there and tell those people what to do if I'm not doing my best when I'm at home, right? When I'm at work. So that's what it's been like. On the other end of it is it's been so great because it exposes me to things I know I would never come across on my own. You know, students, I don't know, MFA students, undergrads too, but especially MFA students because we're all in the world of books. They are the best book recommenders I've ever had. I mean, they tell me, it's like, oh, you need to read this, you need to do this. And of course I can't do every single one, but I mean, I'm telling you, they expand my mind and expand my understanding of genre lots of times. Cause look, I'm not that old a person, but I am different than my students are. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the way that they look at genre, the way that they, I was not raised on Harry Potter. My students were, and they're graduate students, right? There's a different way of looking at fiction. It's a different way of looking at the world, what's acceptable, what's not. If I would have turned in a story with a unicorn when I applied to Ole Miss, I'd not be sitting in this flooded garage right now talking to you, right? I wouldn't have gotten in. But the truth of the matter is now, so many students are interested in that. So many have been shaped by that, and so many of them are doing it well. This type of thing that I need to, I know as a teacher, I need to take a look at. And so that's how they help me. So it informs me in two ways. One, inside out, one, outside in.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You want to tell us with you how it works?
Well, I think I agree with everything you said completely. My students inspire me, help me, they push me forward. And mostly, as you said, they really sort of force you to be at your best, because you're not going to stand there in front of them and try to say something if you don't know it yourself, or you don't feel comfortable yourself, or you haven't tried that yourself, or you don't feel whole yourself. So yeah, I agree. It's just helped me completely.
Yeah, and there's so many times that like I'll hear, I'll say something in class, and then I'm sitting there working on my own thing, and I have to hear myself saying that. I'm like, all right, was I just BSing everybody, or do I believe this? Right? I mean, what am I doing here? And so you have to reckon with it, and go through that process in your head while you're writing. So it's really helpful.
Yeah.
We have a question from Facebook. It starts with a comment that the concept of the Big Door Prize brings me back to the classic Tom Hanks movie Big. I'm not sure if you want that comparison or not, she says, but here's the question. Here's the question. When you're writing and you recognize stuff out there that might influence your work in progress, are you drawn toward it or away from it?
Okay. Yeah. Do we know who asked that question? It's a really good question.
It's the Facebook account is Friendly City Books, a brand new bookstore in Columbus, Mississippi.
Okay, that's great.
One of the two owners would be the one asking.
Amazing. I feel like there's to me, there's two things I want to say about that. First of all, any comp to Big, I would be thrilled with. I love that movie. I don't know. Does that make me lame? Again, I think I am one of the least cool writers on the planet, because I'll sit here and I'll say I love Big. I love show me something like Love Actually. I'll cry. I play Pokemon. You know what I'm saying? I should be a more sort of hardcore kind of guy, but I'm not. I love things that like really affect me. I think I'm just sentimental or something, maybe emotional. But anyway, you're not my therapist. The real question was asking me if there's someone gives me a comp, do I go read it? That answer is no. And it's always been no for me. Even my first book is called The Prospect of Magic. It's about it's a collection of short stories. It was my MFA thesis. It was a collection of short stories about a sort of traveling carnival coming through a small Louisiana town, and it like breaks down. And the person who runs it dies. And so they just stay there. Okay. So it's like all these stories about sort of, carnival people just staying, just sort of taking over this little town. And when I was shopping it around, to no success, but shopping it around, people were like, oh, there's this book called Circus in Winter that just came out. You should go read it. Or, oh, there's this other book, about, a circus. You should go read it. I absolutely would not go read that. In the same way that, again, maybe I'm a simple-minded person, but it's the exact same way that when I wake up in the morning and I want to go to work, I'm not going to look at Twitter first, and I'm not going to look at the headlines first, and I'm not going to read anything else first. The reason is because I have to believe that what I'm doing is important and original. If I don't believe it when I'm sitting there working, then I'm toast. Okay, so like I have to buy in. And if someone's going to say, go read this thing that's sort of exactly like yours, well, what's going to happen to me is I'm going to think, okay, what I'm doing, man, no, it's not that good, or it pales in comparison to this, pales in comparison to that. I can't do that. I have to believe in it. And normally what ends up happening is, if I believe in it enough, that's like 4 years, 5 years, my novel was 7 years of just me believing in it. It turns out that it's okay. Right. But if I was 4 months in to this project and you said, oh, go read this other book about a machine that tells people what to do, I never would have finished this book. I never would have finished it because I would have thought, no, it's already been done. I would have stopped believing in myself, stopped believing in my idea, stopped believing in my characters, start comparing I would start comparing people that don't exist to other people that didn't exist and thinking mine weren't good enough. I mean, that's how insane it is, right? You got to believe. And so to me, the way that I believe is I get up in the morning. I can't have anything else around. I got to look at just me and the made up thing. That's all I want. After my book's done, I'll go read them. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Hey, I've got a question. I am not a writer, I'm a reader. And our class read this book and we really enjoyed it and thought it was a nice change of pace as far as the humor that was involved. And so thank you for reading a piece from the confession chapter. That was by far one of our favorite collectively. We also really liked the apartment band scene.
Yes.
So that was a lot of fun too. But my question for you is, you mentioned about, you wanted to write something fun, and it certainly was, but there were some pretty dark pieces in this too.
Yeah. And
so just wanted to ask you about your thought process for putting those in with so much other lighthearted, humorous, and how you did it and the attention that you gave to those pieces versus your more humorous pieces.
Right. Well, I mean, I didn't feel like I was writing like a comic strip or something. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I felt like I was writing a novel, and I hope that it's a literary novel. And I hope that what literary novels do is, sort of face the truth, right? I mean, they have different spins on it, but they don't, sugarcoat the whole thing. And so, I mean, the darkness in the book, there's dark acts, but a lot of the darkness is our own sort of insecurities and our own sort of fears. All these things are very real. And so if you want to I think that if you want to write a book that's going to resonate with people, it's got to have both sides of the coin there. I mean, if you want to write a satire or something like that, you just really turn up the volume on the humor and, whatever. But to me, I mean, I don't know, I feel like all these people that have real lives, if that makes sense. I mean, and in real life, I don't know anyone's real life who's all been one way or the other. I don't know anyone's real life who's been total tragedy and no moments of joy. I don't know anyone that's been all joy and no moments of tragedy. I don't know those people. So you have both sides of the coin on all your characters. But then what you're doing is, you're the sort of sound producer that's turning the knobs and deciding, well, all right, which one are we going to turn up? Is this going to be a story that goes in this direction or this direction? For me, there's, I don't know, I would say, how to phrase this. There's a difference between, let me put it this way. Okay, I'll talk about it in terms of character. All right. There's a difference between, secondary characters that people don't remember and secondary characters that they do, right? Characters that they do. And the difference is, I think, secondary characters that you don't really remember all face in one direction. Okay, so in other words, they're the guy you don't really remember. If a character walks into a gas station, and there's a secondary character that's selling him cigarettes, right? And he's just grumpy. He's like, here, take your cigarettes. Okay, you don't remember that guy, okay? But there's a secondary character, right, where you walk in, I'm making this up, so this might suck. But you walk into the gas station, right, and the guy is, he's on his phone behind the thing, wanting to sell you cigarettes. And the guy's asking for cigarettes, but the person trying to sell him is on his phone. You overhear him talking to his wife, saying something like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I can be there. Just let me come there. Just let me come visit. Let me come see you. And he says, hold on, I'll be there 1 second. Give me 1 second. And you say, I just need a pack of cigarettes. And the guy's like, looks at us and says, motherfucker, I told you I would be there in 1 second. And then turns back to the phone and says, no, I love you, honey. I promise you, I can take care of you. We're going to get through this, right? There's a huge difference. And neither one of these characters matter to the novel necessarily. They're just the guy that the main character is buying cigarettes from, right? But the difference between those two characters is that one of them has a backstory that's facing in a different direction than their sort of, the story the reason that you're there, right? The other person, you're just like, yeah, just take your cigarettes and go. You don't remember those. You remember people that are multifaceted, right? And so when you're talking about this novel, well, how can it be funny and also have this dark stuff? Well, it's because I want the novel to stick. And I want the characters that exist in it to be memorable to people. And the way that I think characters are memorable is if their emotions run in sometimes opposite directions, or at least not always the same direction, right? So yeah, you have some characters that have had terrible tragedies in their past. You have some that they're the tragedy is very fresh, right? Those things are important, and it doesn't always have to be, the thing I always talk to my students about is like, man, I'll give you all $5 if you don't have another like drunk abusive dad. Can you please stop with a drunk abusive dad in class, because every story has a drunk abusive dad. I know that those people exist, right? But at the same time, it's such a sort of trope that it's not as memorable as, I would even say, a drunk and loving dad. Let's just try that. Let's change one thing. And this main character's problem is that every time they come home, their dad just can't stop talking about how proud they are of them because of their good grades. Let's just try that, right? Let's just change it. Let's just get the directions moving in different, somehow differently. But anyway, so that's it. Yes. Do I want the novel to be overall have some humor and stuff? Of course, that was important to me. But if it didn't have the things that I think that you're referring to, tragedy, backstory, violence, they'd just be jokers. They'd be class clowns instead of, people that you want to hang out with.
Well, great. Thank you, Neil. I think it's time for us to move forward. It's been great 44 minutes. Wonderful. Really enjoyed that, and great way to start off our evening.
Thanks. Thank y'all. That was really nice.
So our second reader for the evening is Catherine Pierce. She's a familiar face here at the Eudora Welty Writers Symposium, both because she's been featured author 3 times before tonight, and also because she's a regular audience member when she isn't on stage. We're fortunate enough to have her as co-director of the creative writing program at Mississippi State University, just down the road, along with Michael Cardos. So we get to see her frequently and share these kinds of events. Originally from Delaware, Pierce has lived and taught in Mississippi for over a decade. She is the author of 3 previous collections of poetry, Famous Last Words, The Girls of Peculiar, and The Tornado is the World, 2 of which have garnered the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Prize in Poetry. Her poems and essays have appeared in 2 Pushcart Prize anthologies, Best American Poetry, American Poetry Review, The Nation, Plowshares, the Southern Review, the New York Times, and many more. Her 4th volume of poetry, Danger Days, was just released last week. Lisa McMurtry, writing for the Clarion Ledger's Mississippi Books page, describes the collection as speaking to the pervasive and seemingly never-ending anxiety that has become ever-present in this time of COVID-19. Despite the dark subject, Pierce often brings her signature dry humor with poems like In Praise of the Horror Movie and High Dangerous. Yet she can be equally serious in poems like Anthropocene, Pastoral, and Planet that take an unflinching look at climate change and the effects of the humans are having on their environment. And yet her speaker in Planet admits that most days I think about dentist appointments and plagiarists and the various ways I can try to protect my body from itself. Far from preachy, these poems give voice to the fears we have in our dark nights and the pangs of conscience we feel when daily obligations keep us from listening to our better angels. At times irreverent and at times wise, or maybe both. They are always deeply human and moving. This is an important new book, and we are so fortunate to hear Katie Pierce read it. Please welcome her.
Thank you so much, Kendall. Thank you, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? Is this working? All right. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much, Kendall, for having me back to the Welty Symposium, which is always so much fun and so inspiring. And I also wish that we could all be in person, but I'm glad we get to do this. Thank goodness for technology. I think that it's possible to get zoomed out. Obviously, we're all getting probably zoomed out daily now. But I was at the sessions this morning, and counterbalancing the Zoomness of everything was the fact that everybody was so talented and engaging and wonderfully human. And I think that like Emma Walsh was saying, I also miss like seeing people in the real world and like hugging strangers and all of that. I also wish I could be doing that. And so at least we get to see each other in little squares, and the squares are weird, but at least we have them, right? So it brings me comfort in this weird 2020 way. So like Kendall said, I'm going to be reading from my new book, Danger Days, which just came out last week. And I figured I'd start off bleak and hopefully get less bleak maybe like as it goes. So but we're just going to start right in with the bleakness, which is the first poem in the book. It starts bleak, which is the one that Kendall mentioned called Anthropocene Pastoral. As Kendall mentioned, a lot of the poems in this book do deal with climate crisis and, kind of what it feels like to be not a scientist right now, but just like a person on the earth recognizing these changes and the very kind of real and subtle ways that they're impacting our daily lives. And so this poem, I wrote this during the super bloom, the California super bloom of 2017. If you remember that, it was when all like the deserts just exploded with wildflowers out in California. And it was, like staggeringly beautiful. And people were taking trips there and pulling off the road to see it and taking all these photographs. But like so many things, it was the result of extreme weather. So there had been like a tremendous dry spell followed by like twice the normal amount of wintertime precipitation. And so those things kind of came together into this beautiful result, but the thing that had caused it was not beautiful. And so I was thinking about how often we see that. Like we go outside and it's really warm all of a sudden in January and we think, oh, it's so nice out today. But like that too comes at a price. So this is a poem about that. Anthropocene Pastoral. In the beginning, the ending was beautiful. Early spring everywhere, the trees furred pink and white, lawns the sharp green that meant new. The sky so blue it looked manufactured. Robins. We'd heard the cherry blossoms wouldn't blossom this year, but what was one epic blooming when even the desert was an explosion of verbena, when bobcats slinked through primroses, when coyotes slept deep in orange poppies. One New Year's Day, we woke to daffodils, wisteria, onion grass wafting through the open windows. Near the end, we were eyeletted, we were cottoned, we were sundressed and barefoot. At least it's starting gentle, we said. An absurd comfort, we knew, a placebo. But we were built like that, built to say at least, built to reach for the heat of skin on skin even when we were already hot, built to love the purpling desert in the twilight, built to marvel over the pink bursting dogwoods, to hold tight to every pleasure, even as we rocked together toward the graying, even as we held each other warmth to warmth and said, sorry, I'm so sorry, while petals sifted softly to the ground all around us. So that's the first poem in the book. Kind of sets partially the tone for it. The next one I'm going to read is a poem called Prayer. And I think all you need to know going into this poem is that there's a play on words that doesn't necessarily translate when I read it out loud, but the word feudal gets used twice. Once it's F-E-U-D-A-L, and then it's F-U-T-I-L-E. So just a word play that is not necessarily, doesn't make sense unless you're looking at it. Prayer. Dear Lord, for years I have prayed the way a rabbit runs from a dog. Dear Lord, I am tired. I would like to pray by looking hard, say, at the wavering stripe of sun on the gray ocean. I would like to pray by carrying a wolf spider to the yard in a juice glass. Lord, I don't know about this feudal nomenclature. Whose invention is that? I would like to pray to you as river, or Adirondacks, or that moment my son called a cicada shell my little guy, or mysterious, deep, and moving. I hope you don't think that's sacrilege. Believe me when I say I think I'll hear you better if I capitalize more. Please forgive me. I am afraid and my fear has crept like kudzu. There is a pun to make here about this feudal nomenclature, but I don't want to make it. So far, this poem is true. Lord, I try to be true. Lord, I love pine needles. I love a jukebox. I love the night my husband and I went to a nearly empty strip club on Bourbon Street. Dear Lord, I don't imagine you can be shocked. It was an October night, and I wore a gray skirt, and we walked back to our hotel happy, holding hands, and that must also be prayer, all of it, I think. Is that all right? Lord, if I call you fireworks over the lake, if I call you these arms of mine on the radio, if I call you soft and untroubled breathing in a bedroom with nightlight, will you hear me? Lord, I pray for that too. Not so much like the rabbit, more like the dog who, done with chasing, would like to rest its head on its paws and hear the word good. Ironically, as I was reading that poem, my own dog started whimpering. She has a lot of feelings and needs and strong opinions. And right now her opinion is that she would like to leave this room and go into the rest of the house, but she can't because I'm the only one home and she will eat things. So we're just gonna let her chill here with me for a few more minutes until the rest of my family returns. That detail about the cicada shell was true. We were at the park one day and my son, who was like 3 at the time, found a cicada shell and put it on his shirt and started calling it my little guy. And I mean, that was just like, I still haven't recovered from that. So And that's a transition into another subject matter of some of these poems, which is being a mother, being a parent. And so I have two sons, and now they're 6 and 9. So, I was writing this book as they were pretty young. And so this next poem came out of, I went to go see a lecture at Mississippi State. The astronaut Scott Kelly came and spoke. And I've always been really fascinated by space. And so I wanted to go hear what he had to say. He's the guy, if you don't know, who spent a year in space. And so when he came back, they sort of studied what had happened to him physically during, like, what a year in zero gravity does to your body and to your brain and all of that. And so I went to go hear him speak. And as he was speaking, I found myself thinking, like, oh, wow, that sounds a lot like what it felt like to have a baby and become a mother. And so, which was like a funny connection that I did not expect to make. But so this is a poem about that. It's called How Becoming a Mother is Like Space Travel. The astronaut told us he didn't look out the window for 8.5 minutes as the rocket launched him beyond our atmosphere. Terrifying things happened. Ground vanished, boosters exploded, day became night, and he did not look. He was focusing, he said, on his job. He was up there a long time. He learned to sleep suspended. He learned how the sunrise looks when you watch it every morning from the soft, dark mouth of space. Many things, he told us, were different than he'd once expected. There's no space ice cream, he said. That's a big hoax. His vision blurred. His body became a study. Blood, appetite, cognitive function. He took many pictures. All of them were beautiful. None of them showed what it was like to float. When the astronaut returned to Earth, more tests were run. Scientists discovered that 7% of his genes had changed in space. He left the planet as himself. He came back as himself, rearranged. And so, continuing with the theme of parenthood, one thing that surprised me about becoming a parent, so I've always been somebody who, Emma Walsh was talking about being someone who, maybe is sentimental or just feels things really deeply. And I've always been that way too. I've always been somebody who, I cry at a lot of things. I was always a big crier, really enjoyed crying sometimes. Like, it was a satisfying kind of hobby. And so I kind of thought, wow, once I have kids, this is going to just it's going to explode. I'm going to be completely off the rails. And sort of the opposite happened. I felt myself kind of, for lack of a better phrase, toughening up a little bit. And I realized it wasn't a conscious decision, but it was almost like some lizard part of my brain knew that I had to kind of find ways to sort of push back against some parts of the world that had always really deeply, deeply impacted me if I was going to be able to kind of function now that I had kids in the world. And so it wasn't a matter of ignoring the world. It wasn't a matter of shutting myself off from it, but it was a matter of occasionally finding ways to kind of tune out so that I could stay truly tuned in and do it in a way that could allow me to kind of function in this world, in this new role. And so this poem is called Strategies for Mothers in the Age of this Age. And it starts with a reference to the Beach Boys album Pet Sounds, which some of you may be very familiar with. And it's the one that includes the song Sloop John B, which for whatever reason is just I can't handle that song. I love it. And it just really, I find it very moving. Strategies for Mothers in the Age of this Age. For one, skip past Sloop John B. That flute might send anyone right into the abyss. Stop ferrying errant house spiders to the yard. We can't waste our ache space on arachnids. If there's a solar eclipse, stay in. It's too much to watch the erosion of light we thought was certain. But let's not call it terrariumed. We'll still hold the same escalator railings, ride in the same commuter trains, carry the same signs and groceries and guilt. We'll just snag a little less. Mothers, I know we used to wander our dark like spelunkers. I know we had headlamps and ropes. Like bats, we knew the pings of our limits, and unlike bats, pushed past them. But now with the news alerts buzzing, Now with that starving polar bear. Now with the gun-free zone signs on the door of the kindergarten. Now with everything balanced on the thinnest of threads that we know not to test for tension. So what if we armor ourselves with horn sections? So what if we recite state capitals in the shower's echo chamber, or avoid the sad billboard eyes of the boat donation girl? So what if sometimes we set down the armfuls of nails and brambles, shut off the radio? We know the shutting off is so we can listen. We know the setting down is so we can pick up and carry. Do one more in this sort of mother theme. In the book, these are not all stuck together, but it sort of made sense to do them this way for this. This is a short one, and when I was writing it, I was thinking about what it felt like to sleep in the days of early motherhood, or like to not sleep, I guess more accurately. My first son, my oldest, he just really hated sleeping. Like he just thought it was just like, why would you do it? And so he chose to never do it. He didn't sleep through the night until he was like 2, and he didn't sleep for more than 25 minutes for an afternoon nap until he started walking at like 15 months. So it was intense. It was super intense. And so this is a short poem about that. And the title goes right into the first line. In early motherhood, I lay down like a cat each night, half repose, half almost spring, ready to leap up, leap after. I was electricity. I was conducted by cries. I learned to vanish the paces between my bed and the crib. I learned to vanish doorknobs, darkness. I never fumbled or stumbled into walls. There were no walls, or I had no body to crash against them. I was molecular, ionized. I was only nerves and milk and now. I slept on my back with my glasses on. I slept no fan, no hum. I slept while rocking. I rocked while asleep. I never slept, but lay down each night inside the purr of my wired, ready heart. I'm gonna let my dog into the rest of the house because she is like not handling this well. So be back in like 1 second. Roxy, you have a lot of feelings. Don't destroy anything. Okay, we're gonna see how that goes. It is seem like everyone sees everything. Okay, so this poem is called Enough, and I'm someone who really loves carnivals and like fairs and amusements, and so this is a poem that kind of references some of those things. Enough. I got here through no talent of my own. I did not birth myself or even will myself into being. One day I was a cluster of cells. One day I was a heart. One day I was a human in the world. Now what? Look at the luck I was given, born into a place with a hot yellow sun, born with 2 nimble hands, a strong enough voice. If I'm not shouting down cruelty, or at least singing all the time, what am I doing? If I'm not building a table or holding a child or slicing tomatoes warm from the garden I've weeded myself, what am I doing? I bought these electric blue flats, suede. I did it because it made me feel a little happy. That small dopamine hit that comes from picturing yourself looking like someone wants to look at. But how absurd is that? How flimsy. I've never learned to change a tire. My music theory is abysmal. Sometimes I don't realize it's snowing until there's already a dusting on the driveway, which is certainly close to excuseless. But I swear I'm mainly paying attention. I swear I'm grateful at least a dozen times a day. If I could cradle the earth in my hands for 10 seconds, I would, just to show it how tenderly I could hold it, how I wouldn't drop it, how I cherish it, even as I'm turning in early instead of going out to see the Perseids. I've always loved a carnival. Is it enough to love a carnival? I could ride the teacups all day. That shriek that comes from spinning, the one that unfurls from somewhere deep below the throat like a bright streamer? It's language. It translates into thank you. I'll read two more, and then I'm happy to talk about anything that anyone wants to talk about. So in keeping with my my space obsession, I came across an article one day about all the stuff that's on the moon, and I had no idea. Maybe you know what's on the moon. I did not. I knew there was like a flag there and like maybe like a golf ball. I had no idea that there is just a ton of stuff up there. Like so much stuff is on the moon. And I was so like shocked and fascinated and horrified by that. And so I wrote a poem about it. It's called On the Issue of Lunar Trash. Dear Moon, forgive us the tie tack. Okay, good. The rest of my family is home now. I can close the door and I can continue reading without interruption. This is fun, right? This is like really exciting and dynamic and lively, right? So, okay. On the issue of lunar trash. Dear Moon, forgive us the tie tack, the falcon feather. Forgive us the golden olive branch. Our wish for peace is our wish, not yours. You had peace, and now you have an olive branch. Moon, what will you do with our $102 bills? Moon, forgive us the watch band, the hammer, the Bible, as if you're the one seeking your own source. All the cameras, all the antenna, the nail clippers. Oh, Moon, you're literally holding our shit. We couldn't be bothered to cart it back to our own atmosphere. Moon, once we stabbed a flag into you, as if you loved our country, any country. You were absence of color, and then we pocked you all silver and red and blue. You were stillness, and then we kicked up dust that had never known anything's kick. Moon, once all our wreckage was a world away, and then we appeared with our tripods and canisters, our larks and catchphrases. I think, Moon, that you must hate us. Your molten mantle must roil, your iron core seethe. You crest the dark sky over my house, and your face looks the worst kind of disappointed, like a mother when her children have bloodied each other's tender bodies. Moon, say it's all right. Say you understand. Look at me, freighting you with a mouth I've invented just so I can hear it say, forgive. Oh, Moon, say you'll forgive me for that too. And I'll just close with the last poem in the book. I wrote this poem after, on the campus of Mississippi State, there's an observatory with one of those amazing, gigantic telescopes. And they occasionally have these open to the public nights. And so we went one night, my family and I, and we got to see Jupiter. And it was amazing. I mean, there it was, you know, you could just see it so clearly. And it was amazing. And I was really struck by it. But I was also struck by this weird feeling that I had, which felt like jealousy. And so I thought that's a really weird feeling to have when you look at a planet. And so I decided to kind of investigate that a little. And so you'll see where that comes out here. Planet. This morning, this planet is covered by winds and blue. This morning, this planet is lit by dustless, perfect light. Enough that I can see 1 million sharp leaves from where I stand. I walk on this planet. It's hard-packed dirt and prickling grass, and I don't fall off. I come down light if I choose, heavy if I choose. I never float away. Sometimes I want to be weightless on this planet, and so I wade into a brown river or dive through a wave and for a while feel nothing under my feet. Sometimes I want to hear what it was like before the air, and so I duck under the water and listen to the muted hums. I'm ashamed to say that most days I forget this planet. That most days I think about dentist appointments and plagiarists and the various ways I can try to protect my body from itself. That last weekend I saw Jupiter through a giant telescope its storm stripes, 4 of its 67 moons, and was filled with fierce longing, bitter that instead of Ganymede or Europa, I had only one moon floating in my sky, the moon called Moon, its face familiar and stale. But this morning I stepped outside and the wind nearly knocked me down. This morning I stepped outside and the blue nearly crushed me. This morning, this planet is so loud with itself, its winds, its insects, its grackles and mourning doves, that I can hardly hear my own lamentations. This planet, all its grooved bark, all its sand of quartz and bones and volcanic glass, all its creeping thistle lacing the yards with spiny purple. I'm trying to come down light today. I'm trying to see this place, even as I'm walking through it. Thank you. And thank you for bearing with me. I truly did not expect that the dog would be the part of my family that that caused, like, everyone else cleared out specifically so that I could have a quiet household. And then it's like the 11-pound dog. So anyway, thank you all. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Thank you very much. Your poems are beautiful, and you have an amazing appreciation for nature. It was really apparent in the poems that we read and the poems that you read tonight. I'm curious, was this a result of your childhood? Were you outside a lot, or is it something that came about from being a mom, being out with your kids?
That's a good question. I guess maybe all of the above. I mean, I think that I definitely spent a lot of my childhood outside, but I don't think more than any other kid growing up in the 80s. You know, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of Delaware. Like, we were in the yard a lot. And it really wasn't until college, when I was, you know, like 19, 20, 21, that I traveled for the first time and went out west, went to Colorado, saw mountains for the first time. I went up to the Adirondacks and saw the mountains there. And it was those two experiences really kind of like something clicked in me when I went into the mountains, both in upstate New York and out west. So that was something really powerful. And I also spent a lot of time at the beach growing up. But yeah, I do think there's something too about being outside with my kids and trying to kind of instill in them the same sense of wonder that I have for things. And I think also, you know, as it becomes more and more clear what we've done to the planet, you know, what people have done, and being able to kind of see these very concrete things that are changing, you know, you miss something more when it starts to go away. And I think that that's in the past, you know, 5 or 6 or 7 years has really kind of snapped into focus for me too. And that probably is partly a result too of being with my kids. Although not only, but I do think that that's probably connected. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the moments of levity and humor in your poetry. And I was just wondering, I also didn't know there was a lot of trash on the moon. So thank you for that fact too.
Wow.
I'm just wondering if that's something you try to cultivate in your practice, or if that sometimes just comes out naturally when you're writing about certain subjects.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good question too. No, I think it comes out naturally. I think if I set out to try to be funny or to try to stick something funny in a poem, I think it would fall really flat. I think that it's just, you know, it's organic when it happens, because I think it's just kind of how I approach the world, you know, like I think that my voice as a poet, it's more articulate than my voice as a regular person. But I think that it feels like who I am. Even when I'm writing in a persona, I think I'm still tapping into parts of me, into the way that I view the world. And I think that one way that I process the world is through humor, or at least partially through humor, even, or maybe even especially through things that are, or when dealing with things that are bleak or that are difficult. So yeah, it's organic. I think that when I was putting the book together and thinking about the structure of the book, I was paying attention to tonal shifts, and humor was something that, it didn't feel right to have like the funniest poem follow the bleakest poem, right? So I was looking for ways to allow the different tones to feel like they fit together naturally. But in terms of writing the poems themselves, yeah, it's just an organic thing, and whatever is required by each poem is what I try to tap into. Thank you.
Catherine, first of all, your reading was wonderful, and I love your work, and I'm so grateful for this symposium because I get introduced to these fantastic poets. I'm curious though, I love space too, and you have some really some interests that parallel mine. And I'm wondering, do you work in any other genres? Do you write any short fiction? I mean, some of these suggest great short stories.
Thanks. No, I don't write fiction, but I have been, in the past few years, I've been writing some nonfiction. And so that's been, yeah, I teach fiction, and I feel, at the intro level, not at the advanced levels, but I teach introduction to creative writing, which includes fiction. I feel like I have a sense of it, and I read a lot of fiction. I think in the few times that I've sat down to write fiction, I'm really bad at the whole plot thing, which is apparently really important with regard to fiction. And so that's where I have some problems. But I have been writing essays, and that's been really fun, and that's been really, it's been exciting. I mean, a few summers back, I set myself a syllabus where I spent my whole summer reading collections of essays by writers that I admire, and just kind of trying to teach myself how to do this genre that I hadn't worked in before, and really just working hard on some essays and polishing stuff. And so I have been doing that, and these days there's not a whole lot of time to write. I think that everyone's kind of dealing with pandemic time in different ways, and it's impacted all of us in our day-to-day lives. And for me, it means that the way that I'm able to allocate my time, I have less writing time than I otherwise would. But I really, really love working in the essay form, or even the very short essay form, the micro essay. And that's something that I'm planning to get back to when I'm able to kind of get some more writing time again. But yeah, so essays for sure. Maybe someday when I'm braver, I'll take a stab at the plot again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine, I was going to ask a question that sort of dovetails off of that, and what Gian asked me earlier about teaching and how it informs you. So you and Michael Cardos are partners, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, we're married.
What a lovely man! I love that person.
Yeah.
Great fiction writer. But my question is, what's it like constantly being around another writer, and how does that inform you, or how does that what does it do to you? Because I'm afraid some people might not be able to handle that sort of thing. So you just talk, if you don't mind.
Yeah. No, I mean, and Mike and I have talked about that. I mean, it's great. Like, I don't know what I would do if I were married to somebody who had like a normal job or a normal life. I don't think I would handle it well, because, and we both said to each other, we get it. Like, I know that if I walk into the office and he's just sitting there like staring at the wall, I know he's working, right? I know he's not just like kind of zoning out and not doing his work. And same thing with me. If he walks in and I'm just like got papers all over and I'm just like drawing shapes, like he knows that I'm working, right? So it looks like a lunatic, but it's work. And so that's great, because we can just kind of support each other in that. We get used to the mutterings that come from other ends of the house. Like, he'll be reading out loud, he'll be writing, and I'll poke my head in and be like, "Did you say?" And he's like, "What? No." And I realize that he doesn't know, and I do the same stuff. And so, no, it's great. And we can talk through our work together, and we'll do that sometimes, and we'll share work in progress with each other. And do you think
nice. It would be the same if y'all wrote primarily the same genre, or do you think it helps that y'all are in different genres?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like that we're in different genres. I'm sure it will be fine if we were in the same genre. I mean, I like him a whole lot. I'm sure I'd like him a whole lot, if he were a poet too. But I think that there's something about being in different genres that's kind of fun, because we're in the same world, but we're in kind of different corners of it, you know? And so it's fun to be able to, we share, our lives overlap in a lot of ways, and it's fun to have them overlap in sort of this larger sense, but to each have our own separate part of that world that we're kind of working in. So, but yeah, it's, you know, and it's been great as I've been writing essays to be able to say, hey, you know, you write prose, what do you think of this? You know, and he's given me some great feedback on that stuff too. Yeah, but it's fun. I mean, I had a friend who said being married to another writer, it's like cheating, because like you have just help all the time, right? Like you just have somebody to bounce ideas off of, or somebody to just kind of cheer you on if you need that. And it's really nice. It's good. That's a good question.
Well, thank you, Katie. This has been wonderful, and thank you for entertaining our questions. Thank your dog for livening things up.
She sure did. That's
What's her name? Or his
Roxy.
name?
Her name is Roxy.
Thank you, Roxy.
I'll thank her. Thank you all.
So every year, the University Press of Mississippi and Mississippi University for Women to get together to award the Eudora Welty Prize for a work of scholarship. I would like at this point to call on Steve Yates to help me to introduce the prize. He's going to talk a little bit about the prize itself, and I'll introduce our prize winner. Steve, if you'll unmute, I'll pin you.
I think I've got it. I hope. The University Press of Mississippi is now marking its 50th year in publishing, and we're arguably the nation's only truly consortial press. By that, I mean the press is supported by all 8 public state universities in Mississippi and governed in a way that draws equally on 8 vibrant sources of intellectual capital and administrative wisdom. Our offices in Jackson, Mississippi, are not on any campus, and that gives our publishing program of 85 or more new books each year a measure of independence, but also of isolation. With all 20 staff members working successfully since March from home, I must level with you. Independence and isolation are not my 2 favorite I words of late. That's why the 2020 Welty Prize means even more to me. This prize represents a special moment of guidance, I believe, from Mississippi University for Women. We rely on at University Press of Mississippi, and we're ever thankful for the longtime shepherding of MUW President Nora Miller, who now represents the IHL on our press board, for the fresh energy of board member Amanda Powers, and the long-standing counsel of board member Tom Richardson. But the Welty Prize singles out a book from University Press of Mississippi and tells us, this is your purpose. This is exceptional. This is why we publish. This is why we keep on. I'm so delighted that this year's Welty Prize goes to Eden Wales Freedman and her new book, Reading Testimony, Witnessing Trauma, Confronting Race, Gender, and Violence in American Literature. I'm eager to hear from her and celebrate this book with you all tonight. Oh, how I wish I were there to hand you a great big check in an envelope, as is the tradition, Eden. Kendall, will you please introduce Eden Wales Freedman, this year's 2020 Eudora Welty Prize winner.
Thank you, Steve. Eden Wales Freedman, our Welty Prize winner for this year, is Vice Provost of Faculties and Academic Affairs at St. Mary's University of Minnesota. She has previously served as Chair and Dean of Communication, Literature, and Arts at Mount Mercy University, where she was also Director of both Diversity Studies and Gender Studies. Her PhD is in Literature from the University of New Hampshire, and she has published widely on theories of trauma and the intersection of race and gender in literature. In her book, Reading Testimony, Witnessing Trauma, Dr. Wells Freedman sheds important new light on Mississippi writers such as William Faulkner, Margaret Walker, and Jesmyn Ward, along with Harriet Jacobs, Sojourner Truth, Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Morrison, and others. She examines both the ways writers provide testimony of historical trauma, and I'm quoting, such as institutionalized slavery and its legacy of racist, sexist, and psychosocial violence, end quote. And how, as readers, we witness this trauma, responding to it in very different ways. Through an understanding of our ways of witnessing, we can work towards social change. As such, Dr. Wells Freedman's work is not only very fitting for our theme of writing in uncertain times, it is also a work of scholarship that is important specifically for our times. With the events of this year, the pandemic certainly, but also the deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Jacob Blake, and so many others, it is vital that we learn to listen to the testimony of trauma and to question and understand how we respond so that our witness can itself be a form of resistance. This is important work that goes beyond the bounds of most literary criticism and that is most deserving of the Welty Prize this year. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Eden Wells Freedman.
Good evening. Thank you, Kendall. That was beautiful. And thank you to the Mississippi University for Women, the University Press of Mississippi, and the Eudora Welty series for this incredible distinction. I'm humbled and honored to have my work so recognized, and I'm delighted to be here. Tonight, as mentioned, I will read from Reading Testimony, Witnessing Trauma, Confronting Race, Gender, and Violence in American Literature, which explores how readers can respond to representations of trauma, racism, and sexism in literature and life. The book is literary theory, so shifting gears a bit from what we've heard tonight, and is written for an academic audience with jargon I created to analyze the specific ways we respond to one another's pain. I'm going to try to save you from as much jargon as possible. In addition to offering literary analysis, however, Reading Testimony has real-world implications. The book strives to answer what we can do as readers and citizens to confront the violence we encounter in everyday life. The first passage I'll read is from my book's conclusion, which explains how and why I began thinking about this project in the first place. And I'm reading an e-copy off my screen so I can access a larger font, but the text is the same. So this is from the book's conclusion. In a graduate seminar entitled The Poetics of Slavery, my professor showed our class the episode from the miniseries Roots, in which Kunta Kinte, a Gambian-born American slave, is flogged repeatedly until he rejects his native name and accepts the slave name his oppressor has given him, Toby. After many lashings have broken his body and psyche, Kinte submits, "My name is Toby." Only then does the overseer cut him down. Although I had seen Roots many times before, I found Kinte's transformation from Mandinka to slave difficult to watch. Our professor had asked us to take notes, but distressed, I instead sat still, waiting for the episode to end. Most of my discomfort came from what I was watching, but my response to Kinte's whipping was compounded by my presence in an academic setting wherein I was uncertain about the validity of engaging a text's emotional versus scholarly impact. When my professor turned off the television and turned on the lights, I expected him to invite us to share our critical interpretations. Instead, he asked, "How did that make you feel?" The question made me even more uncomfortable. I had just watched a violent episode that seemed to have rendered me senseless, and now I was being asked to express my feelings in a classroom, a space I associated not with sentiment, but with analysis. I was also aware that if I expressed emotion in class as a woman, I risked being perceived as less intelligent and professional than and by my male peers. How could I respond? What happened to me as I watched that episode? I wondered. Why did I feel all tied up inside? Why do I still feel unable to move or speak? Why do I feel as if I have experienced something similar to what I witnessed? As I considered my reaction, several of my classmates volunteered their own. While watching the scene, a white male student asserted, I felt nothing. I know that LeVar Burton is an actor paid to play a role. He isn't a slave. He isn't in pain. His name isn't Kunta Kinte or Toby. Why should a man doing his job make me feel anything at all? Because his job is to make you feel something, I thought. Because as Kunta Kinte, he represents an actual historical person. And as an American slave, he signifies a larger group of people divested of identity, agency, safety, and freedom. I was becoming angry in addition to uncomfortable. What is the point of studying literature, I wondered, if we can dismiss it as not real and thus not effective? Can literature testify to historical truth? What happens when readers refuse to engage it? As I reflected, a white female student said, the scene made me angry. Yes, I thought, until she continued, at Toby. Why couldn't he have accepted the name his master gave him? He could have saved himself unnecessary pain. The whole time I kept thinking, God, he's stupid. And then I got really mad. I flinched. Have we as Americans, and maybe even as graduate students who study African American literature, become so comfortable with racial violence that we blame the victim instead of the victimizer? I was becoming increasingly upset. There's something wrong with these responses, I thought. Those contributing to the discussion had all professed an interest in writing about and teaching African American literature, and yet their commentary betrayed a certain ignorance, privilege, and the inability to engage empathically a scene of torture. Earlier that week, I had read Patsy Schweikart's Reading Ourselves Toward a Feminist Theory of Reading. And I thought, just as we need a feminist theory of reading, we need a theory of reading trauma. How we respond to others' pain, even as portrayed in fiction, is important. What can we do instead of ignore, negate, blame, and as I feared I had done, over-identify with, and thereby potentially appropriate others' lived experience? I did not have the vocabulary for it yet, but I had begun to think about the ways readers contribute to trauma when we respond to its literary depictions, both non-empathically and overly empathically. I was repelled by the one student's negation of Kunta Kinte's torture. I was disturbed by the other student's victim blaming, and I was concerned about my own over-identification masked as empathy. Instead of analyzing the film, I feared I had appropriated the trauma of its subject to the point that I could add nothing to the conversation. By declining to join the discussion, I had also emotionally and intellectually elided both what had happened in the film and what took place in class. By keeping silent, I had inadvertently aligned with the student who professed he felt nothing. If I had risked speaking up, I could have promoted readerly engagement versus erasure. How can we respond critically and compassionately to trauma narratives, I wondered? How can we engage scenes such as this one to combat rather than contribute to the suffering they portray? I looked around the classroom. Every student in the seminar was white. How do racial dynamics affect our reading of racial violence? How can readers transcend racial and other forms of difference to witness trauma? My theories of reading trauma and literature, and ultimately this book, developed out of that event and the questions it raised. In treating reader response to traumatic and testimonial literature by and about Black women, reading testimony addresses queries that arose in that graduate seminar. How does a reader respond conscientiously to literary trauma? How does one transcend difference such as race and gender to engage a character's depicted experience? How does one bear witness to representations of historical trauma in and through literature? In answer, my book invites readers first to acknowledge the tendency to respond problematically to literary trauma, as we all did in that graduate seminar. Second, to recognize the specific ways one is personally inclined to respond negatively, e.g., aggressively, ignorantly, and/or appropriatively. And third, to position oneself against these destructive tendencies in order to witness with, not against or as, the speaker or subject. In that seminar, for example, I could have resisted an overly empathic appropriative response by divulging how roots affected me emotionally. I could have avoided ignoring and negating the character's representation of historical trauma by addressing both the scene's emotional impact and my classmates' reactions to it. Voicing my discomfort could have offered the class the opportunity to analyze not only Kunta Kinte's flagellation, but also how we as readers respond to fictive depictions of cross-racial trauma. Had I shared these thoughts, we could have practiced a communal form of witnessing, in which those students who ignored and negated the protagonist's trauma and/or blamed him for the violence he suffered could help me establish critical distance between reader and text. And I could encourage them to treat with greater sensitivity the traumas to which Roots testifies. As a class, we could have held one another accountable, working together to witness collectively. That opportunity was lost that day. From the experience, I learned the concurrent difficulty and necessity of engaging traumatic and racially charged texts. This early lesson informed my future scholarship. So that's the end of that passage. Here's some more context. After my classmates and I struggled to analyze Roots, I began to research how humans respond to others' pain. What I found reinforced what the seminar had suggested. When confronted with accounts of trauma and oppression, most of us respond poorly. We don't know what to do with trauma. We don't know how to respond to prejudice, especially if we have never experienced it. The violence some folks endure makes us feel sad, angry, uncomfortable, and guilty, and we translate those emotions into responses that wreak further damage. My research revealed 3 principal ways one can respond poorly, or in my schema, anti-witness trauma. So here comes a little bit of jargon, bear with me. First, one can join the victimizer in attacking or blaming the subject, what I call aggressive anti-witnessing. Second, one can join the so-called impartial bystander in ignoring or negating the subject, what I call a-witnessing. And third, one can unite too closely with the speaker survivor, appropriating the narrative subject, what I call co-optive anti-witnessing. When, however, we acknowledge our tendencies to respond problematically and position ourselves against those damaging reactions, we can learn to dual witness, to work through trauma with the subject. To explicate how we wreak damage simply through the ways we respond to others, I'll read a section of the book that explores how and why we victim blame or anti-witness aggressively. And this is from Reading Testimony's introduction. The first impulse of most respondents is to align with the victimizer, to blame the survivor for her victimhood, and in doing so, to contribute to her victimization, i.e. to anti-witness aggressively. In confronting trauma, psychologists explain, most people side with the perpetrator, doubting the speaker's story or minimizing or rationalizing her abuse. We feel revulsion and disgust at the witness's narrative, which we transfer to the witness herself, judging and blaming her when she fails to live up to our idealized notion of how a victim ought to behave. Ronnie Jenoff Bowman explains that respondents anti-witness out of a desire to preserve meaning and order. When we blame survivors for their victimhood, we maintain our sanity, assuring ourselves that while bad things happen to deserving people, the world remains safe for us. Reader respondents who refuse to engage trauma narratives may fear that they will discover in their lives the same catastrophes the speaker survivor has encountered. Rather than risk the feelings of contamination that can accompany dual witnessing, we distance ourselves. We blame the victim. For example, following the 2012 gang rape of an 11-year-old girl by 18 men in Cleveland, Texas, neighbors reported that they held the child responsible for her own rape since she was known to hang out with teenage boys and to wear makeup and fashions appropriate to a woman in her 20s. She wanted this to happen, a neighbor told the Houston Chronicle. No one in the community interviewed held the rapists accountable, but repeatedly blamed an 11-year-old victim for her own assault. This destructive response is unfortunately quite common. Lee Gilmore explains that if the contemporary era is an age of testimony and witness, it is also one of judgment. When survivors disclose trauma, Gilmore writes, their witnessing is repeatedly discredited by a host of means meant to contaminate by doubt, stigmatize through association, and dishonor through shame, such that not only the testimony, but the speaker herself is smeared. In such instances, a survivor struggles to work through her trauma as those called to dual witness, anti-witness instead. Respondents also exhibit the propensity to treat trauma narratives voyeuristically. Nancy K. Miller explains that we have become so accustomed in American culture to stories of pain, from the annihilation of the Holocaust to the devastation of AIDS, that we've become culturally addicted to trauma narratives. When a speaker summons the courage to witness her history, readers follow her testimony with rapt delight. In The Vulnerable Observer, Ruth Bahar offers the story of Omaira Sanchez, a 13-year-old girl trapped in mud who became the subject of obsessive media attention. The news-hungry media, which could do nothing to save the girl's life, descended upon her, Bahar writes, fixing their curious and useless eyes on her suffering. To this image of anti-witnessing, Bahar contrasts the actions of photographer Rolf Carlet, who found he could no longer bear to watch from behind the camera, and crouching down in the mud, flung his arms around Sanchez as her heart and lungs collapsed. This story exemplifies the difference between anti-witnessing and dual witnessing. Carlet recognizes his role as voyeur victimizer, snapping pictures of a dying child without entering into her experience, and then moves beyond victimization into dual witnessing, embracing the girl as she dies. Here, the photographer acts as secondary witness to Sanchez's death. Carlet does not deny his propensity as a photojournalist to victimize those whom he photographs. He acknowledges that standing behind the camera is an attempt as a purveyor of sensationalism to document tragedy. But he also transcends his victimizing position by standing in solidarity with the sufferer, by putting his lens aside and embracing her pain. The distinction between secondary and aggressive anti-witnessing surfaces in fiction as well. Gloria Naylor's The Women of Brewster Place emphasizes dual witnessing, but also underscores the dangers of aggressive anti-witnessing. In the chapter The Two, a lesbian character, Lorraine, attempts to join the community by attending a tenant association meeting. Instead of being welcomed, she is aggressively anti-witnessed by her neighbor, Sophie, who verbally attacks Lorraine for performing queer sexuality. This example demonstrates how one can be anti-witness not only for what one has experienced, e.g. a traumatic event, but also for who one is, in this case, a Black lesbian. Whether one is anti-witness for having suffered trauma or for embodying divergent identities, anti-witnessing engenders violence, as the subject already marginalized by experience and or identity is harmed further when others mistreat her. Although Lorraine has done nothing to offend Sophie, other than to exist as a lesbian, Sophie accuses Lorraine of causing a disturbance with her nasty ways. When Lorraine asks what she has done to disturb anyone, Sophie censures Lorraine for stepping out of the shower naked and asking T to bring her a towel. To Sophie, this action is neither innocuous nor routine, but something for which she can anti-witness Lorraine. Don't stand there like Miss Innocent, Sophie condemns. I'll tell you what I seen. Note the voyeurism implicit in Sophie's aggressive anti-witnessing. How has Sophie managed to observe what transpired in private in Lorraine and T's bathroom? She peered through the women's window to catch them doing something nasty. You forgot to close your shades last night, Sophie indicts. I saw you standing in the bathroom door, dripping wet and naked, calling to the other one to put down her book and get you a clean towel. I saw it, I did. Although Sophie anti-witnesses Lorraine for stepping out of her shower and calling for a towel, the reader recognizes that the fault lies with the accuser, not the accused. Drying off after a shower is not nasty. What is nasty is stationing oneself outside another's bathroom window, hoping to catch sight of sexual behavior. That Sophie recognizes that Lorraine forgot to close her shades that night also suggests that Lorraine typically does close her shades, and that Sophie has waited outside Lorraine's window consistently enough to know that the night in question is an anomaly, which allows her finally to anti-witness Lorraine. Sophie's rant highlights the accusatory and voyeuristic components of aggressive anti-witnessing. Okay. In the next passage, I'd like to contrast with Sophie the dual witnessing modeled between Amy and Setha in Toni Morrison's Beloved. This passage appears in chapter 4 of Reading Testimony. Dual witnessing enables the white runaway Amy to help the Black escaped slave Setha give birth to Denver and find her way to freedom. As the women search for a shelter in which a battered Setha can deliver her baby, Amy witnesses Setha's physical and narrative needs, taking cues from Setha as to where, when, and at what rate they can advance, both along their journey and through their conversation. As Setha crawls, Amy walks beside her, and when Setha believes she can no longer continue, Amy offers Setha the strength to do so. It was Amy's voice, Setha remembers, that urged her along and made her think that maybe she wasn't, after all, just a crawling graveyard. By keeping engaged or dual witnessing with Setha, Amy offers her the strength to survive. When Setha can crawl no longer, Amy massages her torn feet and broken legs, emphasizing not only the psychological, but the physical energy required to dual witness. Amy does not glamorize this process, but acknowledges how difficult witnessing can be. It's gonna hurt now, she warns Setha. Anything dead coming back to life hurts. In keeping pace with Setha, Amy engages Setha's life narrative without condemning, co-opting, ignoring, or negating it. In doing so, she transcends racial boundaries to dual witness, saving not only Setha's life, but Denver's as well. As a secondary witness, Amy offers Setha the language and opportunity to witness her trauma primarily. When Amy first views Setha's scarred back, she traces the woman's wounds with her fingers, representing an instance of physical dual witnessing, and declares, "It's a choke cherry tree. Here's the trunk. It's red and split wide open, full of sap. And here's the parting for the branches. Leaves too look like, and darn if these ain't blossoms, tiny little cherry blossoms just as white. Your back got a whole tree on it, in bloom." Amy does not simply transform the appalling sight of Setha's flayed back into something beautiful, the choke cherry tree, but also vocally and tactically witnesses Setha's trauma. As a result, Setha has the opportunity to witness primarily through Amy's secondary witnessing how badly she has been beaten. Setha later confides to Paul D, "I got a tree on my back. I've never seen it and never will, but that's what Amy said it looked like." Through Setha's depiction of her trauma, we realize Amy has offered her the language to speak the unspeakable, helping to convert a story of pain into one of survival. One reason Amy and Setha may dual witness effectively is that their lives have been similar, offering the women a foundation on which to build reciprocity. Like Sethe, Amy has escaped the abusive master of a Kentucky plantation where she was indentured for 16 years. Although they have not fled the same form of subjugation, the women share common ground as fugitive bondswomen seeking freedom. The novel pairs Amy and Sethe as two throwaway people, two lawless outlaws, a slave and a barefoot white woman with unpinned hair. This partnership helps the women traverse difference to align through shared experience. But part of what makes Amy a successful secondary witness is that she does not empathically anti-witness Sethe's experience. She does not imagine that because the women share parallel histories, their suffering is equivalent. Instead, she acknowledges the racially charged disparities between their narratives. When Amy witnesses Sethe's flayed and festering back, she affirms, "I had me some whippings, but nothing like this. Whoever planted that tree beat my master by a mile. Glad I ain't you." Here, Amy embraces the spirit of Audre Lorde's message that while women are uniformly oppressed by the patriarchy, those occupying intersecting positions of marginalization face compounded subjugation. Some problems Black and white women share as women, Lorde writes. Some we do not. Certainly, there are very real differences between us, but it is not those differences that separate us, but our refusal to recognize those differences. In witnessing with Sethe, Amy does not gloss over racial difference, but recognizes that whatever she has borne as a doubly marginalized white female servant does not compare to what Sethe has faced as a triply marginalized African-American female slave. Okay, to close, I'd like to read again from my book's conclusion about the impact of dual witnessing. The question now arises, where does this project lead? What is the value of dual witnessing, and what real-world effect can it have? At its best, dual witnessing extends out of the individual conversation between speaker-survivor and reader-listener into a larger collaborative engagement with trauma. In this vision, dual witnessing serves not only as an intellectual endeavor, but also as a social practice, offering, as Sophia McLennan writes of human rights theory, a bulwark against human wrongs. Critics, such as Harold Bloom, are skeptical of such claims, challenging the premise that care for others can be stimulated by engaging others' testimony, and rejecting arguments that connect the process of reading to the public good. Contra Bloom, dual witnessing is predicated on the belief that reading can engender empathy. What is the point, Mark Bratcher queries, if the aim is not to get reader respondents to behave more humanely with regard to such individuals and situations in their everyday lives? In Can Literature Promote Justice? Kimberly Nance maintains that a principal goal of encouraging readers to engage writers' testimony is to help change their minds about individuals and the world, a development that may, in turn, lead to activism. When dual witnessing helps secondary witnesses respond to traumatized persons and traumatic incidents in literature and life, it functions as more than a theory. It becomes, as Judith Federley writes of feminism, a socio-political undertaking whose aim is not simply to interpret the world, but to change it by changing the consciousness of those who read and their relation to what they read. Per human rights scholar James Dawes, generating empathy is the first and most important step in addressing human rights violations, and dual witnessing is the manifestation of empathy in and through texts. Dual witnessing prompts reader respondents first, to acknowledge society's ills, and second, to work against them. Too often, Carolyn Hyburn explains, people are rooted in their own vantage points and see only what they want to see. Reader respondents can also be blinded by privilege, which protects them from various social problems. White Americans, for example, may struggle to recognize systemic racism because they do not experience it personally. Men may not perceive sexism because they do not face gender-based oppression. Penelope Andrews notes that despite national laws prohibiting violence against women, such violence remains common because it is culturally accepted and has been ingrained in the norms of public and private behavior. Dual witnessing works against such violence. To create a more empathic and equitable society, all citizens are called to witness the traumas and oppressions that suffuse it, even when such traumas and oppressions do not appear to affect them directly. With this understanding, critics such as Gillian Whitlock, Charles Davis, and Henry Louis Gates Jr. celebrate imparted and received testimony as one of the most powerful vehicles to challenge systemic inequalities and human rights abuses. Mia McKenzie emphasizes that heightened consciousness alone will not change the world. Once one commits to witnessing trauma, one is also compelled to act. Words, Ijoma Aluo upholds, matter. They help us interpret our world and can be used to change the way in which we think and act. But understanding on its own will never equal action. Talk, witness, but also act. Richard Rorty, Lynn Hunt, and Martha Nussbaum likewise assert that responding to another's trauma promotes not only engaged reading, but virtuous citizenship. When dual witnessing, the reader respondent acknowledges the violence done to others and is compelled to combat it. Secondary witnesses may volunteer for advocacy groups or urge their elected officials to protect human rights. As Luz Angelica Kirshner attests, the engagement of others' testimony is a catalyst for cultural transformation and political change. Dual witnessing is a revolutionary act. When we engage others' testimony, even if we read from the comfort of our private living spaces, we channel the power to change the world. In This Bridge Called My Back, Tony Cade Bambara writes, now that we've begun to break through barriers and can hear each other and see each other, we can rise up and break our chains as well. Dual witnessing serves as more than a theory of reading. It acts as a revolutionary tool that begins with survivors' voices and ends in the hands of all people. Through the duality of witnessing, the revolution begins at home, as Cherie Moraga and Gloria Anzaldúa suggest, and from there, it cries into the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Eden. We do have time for some questions. Let me start with one. Since you're in Minnesota and so much has been going on, have you been called on to help people process, or at university or wherever, to talk about some of these issues and help people work through that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and is actually a very important part to me of my work. So I'm not native to Minnesota. As an academic, I've kind of bumped around quite a bit, and I only moved here in July, so after George Floyd's murder. But that the pandemic of racism pervades our communities as the pandemic of COVID-19 does, and needs to be addressed so that it is something that we can combat versus something that pollutes us. And so yes, I give talks on combating racism in university settings. I'm giving one on Tuesday. I'll be giving another one at my university later on that week. And that's an important part of me. That's an important part of my scholarship to me, that I'm not just reading and writing about the very real horrific things that happen to people in our communities, but that I'm taking that reading practice out in the world into action. A lot of academics talk about the divide between theory and action, and I consider myself a literary theorist. But I think that theory itself can serve as action if it is realized, if you're committed to that. So when I first started writing about how we respond to sexual violence in literature, I also volunteered as an educator at an intimate partner violence prevention center. And it was important to me that the work that I was doing in my home and in my head and in my reading was also lived out in the world, that I was also listening to people's stories, responding to them, and helping them move through that woundedness. And that there is so much woundedness in the world, right? That the racial woundedness that you mentioned is a huge wound that hopefully we are beginning to address, all too late, but hopefully we are beginning to address it. And that's something I think we're all called to do, to speak and act and commit as a community to making lives more just and equal for everybody.
As you are speaking to various communities, do you anticipate that you might get some aggressive responses to your work? And maybe you
Yes.
already have?
Yes, I get aggressive responses all of the time, which was not always easy. And I don't know that I should grin about it. But in some ways, it means that that people are engaging the material and they're putting their feelings out there, and they're not doing what I did when I sat in that class and was so uncomfortable and just kind of went into my shell. I feel that if folks are angry, there's care there. And I can do something with that. And that's actually, as a teacher, if my students really hated a text, I preferred that to if they had no feelings at all about the text, because something in them was riled up, and that can be turned into an intellectual argument. And so, yes, I've given talks and about white privilege and white fragility and combating the racism that lives within us in order to create a more equitable community. And sometimes those are messages that are hard for people to hear, and they respond in any number of the ways that I said. People respond to things that make them uncomfortable, and one of them is anger at me. And usually I am just grateful that they are willing to put that out on the line, and then we can have an active and honest discussion about it. Sometimes people, I don't know, they don't necessarily say this to me directly, but I do think it's there as as a white person speaking about race issues, people have the very legitimate concern that I'm taking up space that could be devoted to a person of color speaking about those issues. And so I like to address that when I talk about these issues. And what I see my role as is that I have academic experience in these issues. I don't have lived experience in racism, but that I am making an effort to use the privileges that I do have to make the world more equitable. And my voice should not be the only or single authoritative voice on those subjects, right? We need to read and hear from a lot of folks, and particularly folks that are most affected. So in this case, folks of color. But it doesn't really bother me if people are angry at me. I see that as a teaching opportunity. Good question.
Thank you.
Well, we've had a good 2 hours, a little bit more. I'm sure we could handle one more question if someone is just shy enough, but not quite asking it. I don't want to cut anyone off, but I also certainly don't want to leave Eden sitting there in silence either. So I'll give it just a couple beats.
I got one. Eden, thank you for being an ally for equality. Do you consider yourself a feminist? And do you think the feminist agenda addresses the issues facing Black women?
What a great question. Yes, I do identify as a feminist. I think, however, that it is very important when claiming that term not to slip into white feminism. For far too long, all of the so-called women's movements have focused on the rights of white women. White women have espoused racism in fighting for their own rights, to the detriment of women of color. They have treated women of color and gay women really not as women. And so for those sorts of reasons, women of color have put forth the title womanist, right, to differentiate from feminist, which really does have a lot of racist implications within the feminist movements. I take the dictionary definition of feminist that you're fighting for economic, social equality for all people. So I think that anybody who thinks that all sexes and genders should be treated equally is a feminist, whether they take up that word or not. But I think it is very, very important for white women in particular to confront the racism that has been part of that movement, right? Movements are complicated, and a lot of first and second wave feminists did a lot of good things for white women that have benefited, say, me personally. But they did a lot of other really awful, inequitable things for women of color and gay women. And if you're not an intersectional feminist, you're not really living a feminist life. And so everyone needs to be aware of that history and making sure that you're fighting for the rights of all folks, especially the most vulnerable, not just the people who look like you.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something about the quietness in the group. And I will have to say that I am not a literary anybody, except have been a reader all my life. It was the bookmobile in small towns that saved my life. And my mother's commitment that I could read anything I found that I wanted to read. Absolutely anything, no questions asked. So, but I am a psychologist and I teach counseling courses. And I have sometimes shared some violent experiences in my younger life. And what I have found is that it takes a while for a class when they hear something and it's coming from the mouth of a person it happened to, that people in general get very quiet. That it's, and some of it may be that, you know, it touches things in them, and some of it is they don't want to say anything that would hurt somebody. But I'm in a profession where we're supposed to help each other. But I do that myself because I don't think a class is a group where a student should share the traumas that have happened to them. But I don't think counseling students should go out in the world and never having heard anybody say what really happened to them, because they need to begin to learn how to respond, which is why I'm so excited about your book. But because I see a real direct, usage of, your terminology and your theories, that will help them put structure to learning about responding. It's not just an emotional thing. It's you have to face what you're doing and think about it. So as soon as we got this quietness, I thought, all these people are deeply affected. That's what I thought. You touched all of our lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. And thank you again, Dr. Welsh Freedman. It's been a lovely evening. It's been a fabulous day. Great reading last night as well. And we have one more panel starting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So as usual on a Saturday morning, we try to get up and read some literature or listen to some literature. Have your own coffee this time instead of some of ours. And I'll be happy to see you all in your living rooms or wherever you are on Zoom or in Facebook again. Thank you all for coming. It's been a joy.